Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's PQN webinar. My name is Jessica Butler and I'm the Deputy Programme Manager for the Perinatal Quality Network. For anyone not familiar with the network, we sit within the Royal College of Psychiatrists and set standards of care for inpatient and community perinatal services. We work with our members to identify examples of good practice and areas for improvement. We'd also usually offer a series of events and networking opportunities, but in the absence of these face-to-face events, the aim of these webinars is to provide a space where teams can share experiences and discuss new ways of working. And before I hand you on to our two teams who are going to lead today's session, I've got a couple of housekeeping bits just to go through. So firstly, the session is a live event, so your microphones and cameras will be turned off for the duration of the talk. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask either of the two teams today, please use the Q&A function which is along the bottom of the panel of Zoom, and we'll answer these at the very end. And you can also use the chat function if you're having any technical issues, and one of the team from the Royal College will try and assist you with that as well. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto our web pages later this week if you did want to go back and watch it or refer back to it. So speaking today, we've got two really fantastic perinatal mental health teams who will be telling us about the online therapy groups that they've been providing since lockdown restricted their regular practice. First, we have Dr. Nick Hawley, Dr. Rachel Lucas, Emily Monger and Leanne Keswick from the West London NHS Trust, followed by Dr. Hannah Coates, Amy Rogers, Dr. Charlotte Johnson and Hayley Brown from the Midlands Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. And each team is going to talk about the work that they've been doing. And as I said before, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions, please do leave them in the Q&A portion. So yeah, and from me, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Hawley and the West London team.
Hi, thank you, Jess. So we're here from West London. We are a tri-borough service that covers Hounslow, Hammersmith and Fulham and Ealing. And we were going to just share a few ideas today about our experience of running some of our interventions online, particularly our group interventions, and a little bit about our individual interventions. So the 13th of March, like most people, there was a bit of a shock warning that nothing would take place face-to-face anymore, and that we needed to kind of make other plans. So at that point in time in West London, we were running a coping skills group, which is a 12-session 3-module group based on DBT principles. A wellbeing group, which is a recovery kind of orientated activities, a butterfly group, which is a peer support group fortnightly, and the circle of security group, which is an 8-session group for women in the postnatal period, and the content is based on ideas related to attachment and meeting the needs of babies. At that point in time as well, we had 48 women having individual psychological therapy and 4 on the waiting list. So, what we really thought, first of all, is, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I think it felt quite challenging to conceptualise how we would try to move forward with continuing to provide interventions that we really believed in without being meeting with women face to face. So I think other people in the team might have had different ideas, but I think what we particularly thought is, how will we manage risk? So how do we take account of that, think about that and manage that safely when we are behind a screen and women are kind of many miles away, probably in their own homes? We also thought, how will we manage the IT? How could that really work? And more personally, we thought it probably won't work. So that was a challenge. And then we also thought about confidentiality. So lots of our women live in homes with their family members, but also lots of women live in shared accommodation, so accommodation that they're placed in with women that they may not know, where there isn't necessarily a lot of shared space or individual space for that matter. And I think there was a part of us that was anxious that some of the women wouldn't want to attend, or might find that unusual, or they might find that kind of difficult. Okay. So I think I'll say kind of a bit about the things with the problems that led to the things that we needed to really think about. So we really need to think about the video platforms. Our trust had quite a kind of strict, if I'm allowed to say that, hopefully there's no one from the trust watching, but our trust had quite a strict policy on the video platforms. They were quite clear that they didn't want us to use anything other than what they recommended, and at the time that was recommended, the functionality on the group's platform was really limited, and it meant you could only see 4 screens. So that felt really difficult, to be running interventions without being able to see everybody in the room, and not just for us, but for the other women as well. So as I said earlier, we worried a bit about confidentiality. How will we know who else is in the background? How will we know that the women speaking in one place wouldn't be able to hear kind of things in other people's homes and vice versa? And we also wondered about safety plans, so trying to think about how we might make plans for individual contact between co-facilitators and women, thinking about whether we would use the chat function, the text messaging function, and just kind of getting our own heads around how to feel more okay that some of those things that we might put in place would be adequate to safely run these interventions online. Practicalities, there was a lot of working out of practicalities, getting questionnaires and worksheets to women. So one of my, Emily, one of our colleagues in West London, will talk a bit about the Circle of Security group. And so for those who aren't familiar with that, the group is run by showing DVD clips. So there was a practicality of how do we share those, how do we make sure people can see and hear them, see and hear us, see and hear each other, as well as the worksheets, questionnaires that therapies love. It's not therapy if there's no questionnaire or worksheet, is it? So how are we going to get those to women, and how are we going to make those kind of useful? And the other bit, I think we also had to increase our tolerance of poor connection and hearing half sentences and doing our best to try and understand what people are saying if the connection cuts out, and also just having to be quite frank, sometimes we can't hear and we have to ask again, or we have to ask people to say that again, and just bearing with that and increasing our tolerance to that. I'm going to hand over now to Emily.
So I'm going to talk a bit about the Circle of Security group that we run. For those people which aren't familiar with the group, I'll just explain a little bit about it. It's an 8-session group that's offered routinely to women to help them develop their relationship with their baby or child and form a bond, particularly when they might be facing challenges in managing in this area. The group is reflective in nature, and it's organised around an observable concept of attachment. So in relation to the concept of the circle itself, it's the idea that the caregiver or the woman is the hands on the circle that supports the child or baby, and they explore through the top of the circle and return on the bottom for comfort. And also we talked a lot about sort of how women could relate to managing their own emotions and reflecting about other caregivers' emotions and other children's emotions on their own, and relate this to their own experiences. And we did this through showing video clips of real-life caregivers and their children or babies. And then we would facilitate discussion around this and sort of encourage empathy around these concepts for the women. The effectiveness of the group is based on the assumption that change comes from the caregivers developing specific capacities in relationships rather than learning behavioural techniques. So that was the idea of the group. So we ran 2 full groups online. 13 women completed them. We found that none of the women declined on the basis of the group being online, although we did find that 1 woman on the waiting list did not have the technology to attend. We also carried out screening appointments, which were a bit like assessments online. This was to become familiar with the women or caregivers, and also to sort of test the platform that we were using with them and to make sure they were comfortable using it as well. We actually found that the attendance increased, so it went to 92% compared with 71%, which was the mean of the last 2 face-to-face groups. And if we just move to the next slide. Thank you. Although 25% did say that they would have preferred face-to-face if given the choice, we do think we did feel that this would reflect that participants, and they gave the feedback that they noted the ease of attending from home and that it sort of reduced their stress. So we think there was something about it being a bit easier, not having to physically attend appointments, perhaps because this was for the new baby as well. 100% actually rated the group as helpful or very helpful, which was really positive. And what was interesting is that participants commented on connection difficulties, but also stated that it did not prevent engagement or learning. So I think that was interesting because as facilitators, sometimes it did feel quite difficult when the connection was lost, but actually people said that, you know, that didn't stop them learning, which was really good. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what's been different? Some of the challenges we found was that there was less chance for women to talk and support each other in the break in the group. So as face-to-face, they might have been able to sort of bond a bit easier, although we did find towards the end of the 8 sessions that they did start chatting and empathising with each other, which was really positive to see. It just might have been a bit more slow in that sense online. It was a bit more difficult to get to know the women quite as well and observe the bond with the baby, or see if they were struggling at all, and also to get a sense of how the women were outside of the group. And it was also a bit more difficult to observe how women experienced the material that was shown to them. But I'd like to say that overall it was a really positive experience, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. So we were also providing a DBT-informed coping skills group. So we already had one running before the pandemic with 7 participants, and we moved it online after around a gap of 12 weeks. And we then offered one group purely online, same content as the face-to-face group. Before doing that, we attended a webinar facilitated by the DBT skills groups online to think about and give us advice and guidance around issues like cameras being off, confidentiality and risk, which helped us organise the sessions online. Can we move to the next slide, please? So, all women had completed Module 1 in the face-to-face group. All were invited to continue the group online. 4 accepted and 3 declined for various reasons, including the baby being over a year, returning to work, and a preference for individual therapy. Attendance has been really difficult, and we wondered if it feels very different from attending face-to-face initially and having a long gap in that first group that had done the initial group face-to-face. One woman that attended the first 2 sessions of the online group then left, advising that she was not finding the online group helpful. The online group, the attendance rate overall so far has been 91%. No women have dropped out of the treatment so far. Attendance has been prompt and more prompt than face-to-face group. Their feedback has included and more constructive feedback, including kind of worrying about being on camera and how exposing that might be. Again, finding it easier to get to the groups because of it being online. They also talked about the sharing of resources online being helpful. It can be more relaxed because they're in their home environment. They're able to tend to their baby in the way that they would want to. They feel more relaxed at home. They talked a little bit about the lack of space for that informal conversations that we might have between breaks, particularly that face-to-face group. They felt they lost that essence of that informal conversations. But it also made them feel less alone, because with everything that happened with the pandemic, most things stopped. And so being able to come online and connect with people was really helpful to them. So what we've learned. So we've learned that co-facilitators need to be more actively involved in the teaching of the material in the face-to-face group. The co-facilitator also needs to have some IT knowledge, particularly around using the online platform, and they've been really integral in terms of getting the group going. We've had to be more creative in terms of our teaching methods. We've been doing a lot of role playing and things like that that's helpful to ensure that women stay engaged with the session. Co-facilitators need to know the material in case there's connection difficulties, which obviously happens quite often, so they need to pick up where the facilitators stopped. And just to maintain the balance between flexibility and maintaining the therapy principles within the session. Thank you.
Alongside the groups, all of the women who we were seeing face-to-face have continued their therapy either by video or by phone. The split is 62% are attending video appointments and 38% via phone. We've tried to advocate for video appointments where possible for a number of reasons. It seems to help with the back and forth in conversation. You can pick up on people's body language, you can see mum and baby together. and it seems to best simulate a face-to-face appointment. There are a number of reasons why some women have requested phone appointments rather than video. Some people have struggled to have a reliable internet. Some people leave the house if they don't have confidentiality at home, where video would be difficult in the park. Or some people have said they don't feel comfortable being seen on camera. I think in my experience, some of the women who have started on phone have kind of later on happily transferred to using video with some encouragement. I think most people generally have some apprehension about being on video, and we would spend part of those appointments just being on video, having a conversation and moving away from the focus of the therapy for a short period of time until people felt comfortable. One of the women in the service is having face-to-face therapy to meet her communication needs. And when we initially transferred from face-to-face to virtual therapy, 4 women declined initially, but since that time 2 have consented and started virtual therapy. Next slide, please. So I guess we've all learned a lot. It's been a big change and a big learning experience. Now that we've been offering virtual therapy for some time, what we know is that both therapists and their clients are finding it possible, and from verbal feedback helpful. The work, I guess, a bit like the groups, the individual work seems to take a bit longer than when you're face-to-face. And this also might be due to the impact of additional anxiety due to COVID. For trauma-focused therapy, we've spent more time on the initial grounding work so that potential dissociation can be managed remotely and safely. And we've spent some time talking with women about maintaining the focus of therapy and the framework compared with case management. And this has differed for different people depending on the need and the impact of COVID for them specifically and the anxiety related to that. Next slide, please. So where are we at now? We are planning to run another 12-week coping skills group in October, hopefully with about 6 women. Our next Circle of Security group will also start in October. And we are evaluating both groups with the same outcome measures we used face-to-face. And this will mean that we can focus on comparing the outcomes between face-to-face interventions and online interventions and make a decision about what suits the needs of the women best for each of the different groups and interventions. I think when it's possible, we would like to think about prioritising running the Circle of Security group in person. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that you can observe mum and baby, and a helpful aspect of the group is matching what you see in the videos with what you observe between different mums and babies, and it helps them map the concepts onto themselves and see them then at home in between sessions. We will also prioritise women who are accessing trauma-focused interventions and parent-infant interventions, as both of these have been more difficult to do online. And I think building trust with the women online seems to take longer, and where that's difficult, we would prioritise doing that face-to-face. I think that's everything from me, unless anyone has anything to add.
That's great, thank you. Yes, so I think we'll pass on to Hannah and her team.
Thank you so much. It was so interesting kind of listening to what you guys have been doing. We are from the Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust Perinatal Service. So we're just going to be presenting what we've been doing over the last couple of months about our virtual groups. So our service covers South Staffordshire and Shropshire. The South Staffordshire team has recently expanded, and the Shropshire team is an entirely new service. Before everything changed and lockdown hit, we had a programme of in-person groups including Circle of Security, Walk and Talk, Coffee Mornings and Stay and Play. And we were in the process of developing our emotional coping skills group and an anxiety-based group, which were both due to start in April, just as the whole country went into lockdown. Next slide, please. So as everyone knows, COVID has meant that we've all kind of gone into lockdown. Our trust stopped doing any face-to-face work or in-person work, and we've all been encouraged to be working remotely since. All of our groups were due to start in April, but we needed to rapidly adapt them. We had some quite clear guidelines that we were going to be using Microsoft Teams. I feel like we've been on a bit of a development with Microsoft Teams since it started. So we've run an anxiety group initially and an emotional coping skills group initially. At that time, you could only see 4 people on the screen. So we had one facilitator per the 4 people on the screen so that you could pin them, so that then we could all have kind of eyes across the whole group to try and feel as safe as possible. And then as Teams has developed, we've also added other programs to our virtual group. So we've had Circle of Security and we've had some peer-led groups as well. All individuals referred into the groups by their care coordinators, and then they're screened by the group facilitators prior to the group via telephone to build that rapport and just kind of give a little bit more information and check out that it's definitely right for them. So since April, we've run 2 anxiety groups, 2 Circle of Security groups, and 1 emotional coping skills group, an in-person walk and talk group, a virtual coffee morning, and an in-person teddy bears picnic, all within the guidelines. And then in addition, this sort of term, so starting over the next, well, last week and this week, we started again with an emotional coping skills group, Circle of Security, an anxiety group, and also we've added a gentle steps programme. So as part of this presentation, we're just going to run through each group. We have gathered some service user feedback via SurveyMonkey, and we've done some focus groups, so we'll give some information that we've kind of got from the women accessing the groups, and we will just have a brief think about kind of what we've learned along the way and what next for us.
Okay. So Overcoming Anxiety workshop was one of the first that went to virtual. We run it as a 6-week programme, and each session it comprises of an hour of psychoeducation and discussion, and the last 15 minutes is a practical skill that the ladies are invited to try out during the session. It's facilitated by team occupational therapists, clinical psychologists. We've also had a trainee co-facilitating it, peer recovery support worker, and a support worker. To date, we've run the group twice, as Hannah said. The first time, because it was quite a rush to get online, there was lots of pressure to do that. We didn't do any outcome measures. We certainly didn't do any outcome measures, but we've looked at the data retrospectively using clinical notes to draw some outcome measures from there. And then the second group that we ran had both service user feedback using SurveyMonkey and also pre and post outcome measures that were completed. Next slide, please. So outcome data, so 18 in group 1 that we ran, 18 ladies were referred, 12 completed. We had a mix of antenatal and postnatal women, although it was certainly more postnatal women that attended. And in terms of pre and post GAD, pre-GAD average was 16.15, being in the severe range, and post-GAD was 9.12, moving towards the mild range. When we looked at the data for group 2 that ran sort of May, June time, so a little bit later, we had 15 referrals, 9 attended, 8 completed the course, and again we had less antenatal women, and we had 8 postnatal women and 1 antenatal. And we are considering and looking at whether we need to do a separate anxiety group for antenatal women, because their needs appear to be quite different, and the referrals would be probably reflective of that. Pre-GAD on group 2 was 15.9, so within the moderate range, and post was 7.5 in the mild range. What I didn't say when I was talking about the groups was not only did we run the group virtually for an hour and 15 minutes each week, every session was accompanied by a workbook that was sent with the link the previous few days before the group ran. And the reason we did that was because we know that we're working with ladies who are in lockdown with lots of people around and babies that might not be settled at that particular moment in the duration of the group. So ladies find it quite helpful to have a workbook that ran alongside so that they could go and have a look at it later and didn't feel they were missing out on the content. In terms of the content, we looked at physical, cognitive and behavioural symptoms of anxiety in relation to the CBT model. And then we linked all the coping strategies to physical, cognitive or behavioural difficulties. We also incorporated sensory modulation as a standalone session. We looked at self-care, and our ultimate aim for the women by the end of the group was to develop their own individual wellness toolbox. That is, all the techniques that we taught, we encouraged them to practice them, look at the ones that they found the most helpful, and therefore come up with their own unique set of skills that they could use. Next slide, please. So service user feedback, we obtained using the SurveyMonkey app programme, and we also had a focus group on completion of each group. SurveyMonkey, of the attenders of group 1 and 2, we had 8 responders, which meant 4 from each group. And we also had a focus group that was attended by 6 women altogether and 3 from each group. General themes, lots of them preferred virtual and reflective of what the London teams were saying, in that it made it easier for them to attend. They didn't have to worry about getting out of the house, you know, with a small child. So lots of them preferred that. Some of them said that it made them more likely to attend face-to-face groups on the back of attending a virtual group first, so to build their confidence. Which we thought was quite interesting. Lots of the women wanted the group to be slightly longer, although we had to be really careful about it not being too long in session or in length to promote others' attendance. Felt it was more accessible online. Yeah, and lots of people said they would like to attend in person because they liked the sort of social interaction, getting to know other mums, but other people, as I've said, saw in person as being a barrier to their attendance. Next slide, okay. Yeah, I don't know if you can quite see it, it's kind of in smaller print, but this is the SurveyMonkey questions that went out to all of the ladies. So across there you can see that, you know, generally people pretty much found the content of the sessions informative. They quite liked the length of the session. They felt that the information on workbook and how it was delivered by facilitators was good. That they used the workbook, that they felt like things had got better. So as you can see across the graph there, our feedback was pretty good and pretty pleasing for us. So yeah, next slide please. So these are just some direct quotes that we lifted from the focus group. The ladies were really helpful to us in providing constructive feedback, and that meant that in between group 1 and 2 we were able to make some minor alterations to try and make group 2, and now we're on group 3, a little bit different and a little bit better, we hope. So yeah, people making comments about, you know, we know that people have been very socially isolated within lockdown, so people felt less alone, which was lovely to hear. People were very anxious initially about the digital platform, but actually over the course of the session found that it worked well. Easier to manage childcare. Obviously some of our mums had a newborn or small baby, but also toddlers and school-age children and everything else we're trying to juggle. Some people found it easier to share in this format as well. And again, people like the booklet to have a refresh back. They suggested some video clips as well, which we haven't got around to doing just yet. And yeah, more confidence to engage and attend face to face. Next slide, please. So based on, as we said, the focus group, it was initially an hour. And as I explained, we then went to an hour and 15 minutes. Some of the feedback from the group 1 cohort was that the technique that we teach at the bottom, so that might be progressive muscle relaxation, rhythm soothe breathing, those kind of things, felt a little bit rushed at the end. So we tend to do the theory and discussion for an hour and have 15 minutes to do a practical activity. They wanted an explanation sheet about each activity. So again, perhaps square breathing, when's best to use it, how will it help me, that sort of thing. So we put those in. They wanted more real life examples, which was perfect for us because we ran it with a peer worker who shared her experiences, and it made it more real. The same as the perinatal graded exposure plans, we were able to make those perinatal focused rather than general adult focused, which the ladies liked. They wanted at the beginning for it to be made very clear that babies are absolutely okay to be in the room. We were mindful of confidentiality, but we also acknowledged that children under 1 won't breach confidentiality. So that was okay. We just didn't want other adults in the room. We had to make some changes. We did, one of our peer workers wrote a beautiful peer toolbox kit, but it was in Publisher, so some of the women couldn't access that. So we now save all of our workbooks in a PDF format. This one's quite interesting. We chose initially not to do group introductions, only the clinicians on the call, because we made the assumption that it was an anxiety group and everybody must be too nervous to make their own introduction. But our feedback was that actually they wanted to know which of the women were on the call, whether they were pregnant, how old their baby was, etc. So we brought that in, and that's gone down okay. Yeah, and we're looking at ways to develop the social connection outside of group. Some of the ladies have suggested perhaps Facebook or WhatsApp, because that's the one bit the ladies really miss, was that chat on the car park as they leave group, or that chat at coffee break. So those are things for us to continue to think about. Next slide, please.
Okay, so we'll just hand over to Charlie to hear a little bit about the emotional coping skills group.
So we developed a maternal emotional coping skills group, which is very much based on Marshall Linehan's DBT skills training manual, but also we were able to take some really, really helpful ideas from the maternal emotional wellbeing programme that was developed by Dr. Hannah Wilson from Southern Health NHS Foundation Trust. What's really lovely about that is it is very much specific for the perinatal period. So there were lots of ideas in there about holding baby in mind whilst we're learning about emotional coping skills. So we developed a 6-week programme. The reason we went for 6 weeks was because we were thinking it would be quite helpful to have a programme that worked around school term times, and it would maximise the number of groups that we were able to get in a sort of a school year. So we're planning to run another 2 this term. We've just started the first group this morning, which was really lovely to get back into it. Initially, we devised this programme as a 1-hour session. I think what we were thinking is that it might be difficult for mums doing this group remotely to be able to focus for a lot longer than an hour, especially with all the anxiety around fitting in baby care around the duration of the programme. And actually that's one of the things that we've changed, but we'll come on to that. So initially the group was facilitated by a clinical psychologist, myself, and also a trainee clinical psychologist who we were so lucky to have on placement. She was absolutely fantastic and really helped out with the group in such an incredible way. So the 2 of us ran the first group. It was the first time that we'd run that kind of group within the service. So as Hannah was saying, we were trying to develop a group to run it face to face, and as everybody knows, plans fell through. And actually we were quite amazed at how relatively easy it was to translate it into a remote group. So that was a really positive experience. So we gathered service user feedback at the end of the group via a focus group. The first time around, I think we were so quick to sort of pull it all together, we didn't actually get round to doing formal outcome measures for the initial group. There were obviously service users who were known to us and had care coordinators within the team. So we were very aware of risks. And what we also did was made sure that between the sessions we did phone calls to make sure that the ladies participating in the group were okay with the material and assessing risk at the same time. So for that first group we had 8 clients referred to us, 7 attended from the beginning, and by the end we had 4 who completed. The average number of sessions attended was 4. I think we were hoping for a bit more consistency, but actually I think it's sort of the nature of the group and the client group who were coming to those sessions. But actually it was a really, really enjoyable group to run. We found that the group were incredibly supportive of each other, very open in sharing their experiences with each other, and it made for a really enjoyable experience, I think, for the facilitators, as well as helpful for the ladies who actually attended the group. So the feedback that we got from the focus group was actually really positive. I think the feedback that really stuck with me the most was one of the ladies said it's the only group programme she's ever managed to finish, and how proud she was of herself. She was saying there was something about doing the group remotely that made it easier to access it, but also something about the fact that the other people in the group were all in the perinatal period. So as an adult, she'd been to, adult services and been to groups with people who she just didn't feel she had as much in common with. But I think being in the perinatal period, it just really helped her to feel like she was bonding with the other mums who were attending. Also, the feedback around the size of the group was really positive, and it made us realise that we really needed to make sure when we were doing the pre-group phone calls, we needed to let people know that there were only going to be a maximum of 8 people in the group, because people were saying, oh, I thought there was going to be about 50 and we'd hardly be able to see each other on the screen, and I was so anxious about starting the group. So it was really useful for us to hear that from people, to make sure we could offer some reassurance before running the next group. So yes, the positivity around doing the group remotely. We really encourage people, if they felt uncomfortable around, doing baby care with the camera on, or when we were doing experiential exercises, to make sure people knew that it was absolutely fine to turn off the cameras, to mute the microphones, and people did do that really regularly. It didn't seem to bother anybody. You just see sort of black screens popping up and then people coming back, and it just seemed to still flow really nicely, which is great. We sent all handouts via email afterwards. People said that was really helpful because it meant they didn't lose them in the way that they had done when they'd attended previous groups, and they'd been given this lovely file to keep with all the group notes in, and then they lost that and felt like, they didn't have anything to go on then. So knowing that it was on email, it was always saved there, was really helpful for people. And the phone calls between sessions seemed to go down really well as well. I think it helped us to keep an eye on what extra things might be going on for people between sessions, and to be mindful of when certain things came up in conversation, where it might be an area that we might need to just think about extra sensitivity and extra support for people. So the focus group feedback, I think, really benefited us because it taught us a lot about the things that were useful to people that we hadn't considered, or where we might need to tweak things, but the things that we'd already thought about, it just really helped to consolidate. Yeah, actually that's a really good idea. We need to be doing that moving forwards. So there have been a number of things that we've changed ready for the group that we've started running this morning. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we've done is increase the duration of the session. So an hour, we always felt was probably going to be a bit ambitious, but we thought we'd start with an hour and see how it went. But we've now increased that to a 90-minute session. First session this morning was certainly a lot better at 90 minutes. We thought we might have a bit of time to spare, but I think we finished with about 4 minutes to go. So that was absolutely perfect, and hopefully it'll carry on in that kind of way. I know this has been mentioned already, but the opportunity to keep in touch with one another after the group, I think, was something that we missed a trick on the first time around. But lots of the feedback was around wishing that people could have had an opportunity to take numbers or email addresses or whatever, so they could keep in touch after the group. This time around, we've already mentioned to the ladies that around about session 3 or 4, what we'll do is ask via email if people want their email addresses shared with each other, so that we'll be able to do that for those who want to have that social contact with people. What we're going to be doing is looking at the supporting information coming through in a more accessible format. I think sometimes we went a bit handout happy on the emails that we sent out. So I think what we need to do is make that a bit more concise, and to make sure that it's very accessible for people. And this time we've added in the outcome measures. So this time we're using the DERS 18 and also the Core 10. What we've done is asked the care coordinators to do those outcome measures with the clients before and after the group. So it'd be interesting to have a look at the outcomes there. So as we know, the weekly support calls were really valued. People actually said it helped to keep them in the group because people had a personal interest in in that individual and how they were doing, how they were getting on, and whether or not they needed any additional support. So we're going to keep those support calls moving forwards. I think one of the things to note there is that they can be quite resource intensive. Having a trainee involved last time was incredibly helpful. This time around we've got 2 qualified psychologists, and we're looking at our diaries thinking, I'm not quite sure how we're going to fit these in, but obviously you find time, don't you? So those are the changes that we've made for this time around and how we're going to be moving forwards with the programme.
So we also ran a virtual circle of security parenting programme, which the other presentation helpfully kind of ran through what that's about. Just thinking about kind of running circle of security online, those of us who were trained facilitators were really, really anxious about doing it online. We really enjoy running the face-to-face programme or in-person programme. We were just feeling really nervous about what it would be like kind of switching to be online. And then there's the additional kind of technology of kind of having to play the video and share the screen, and you just have to feel really confident with that. And I'm sure the group got really annoyed with me saying, hold a minute, hold on, I'm just going to share my screen again. But somehow it seemed to work, and we only had a few major technical problems, but I think we styled them out. So the group was facilitated by trained circle security programme facilitators and supported by our lovely OT and the trainee that Charlie was just talking about. We had 2 groups running in parallel. Because of timing, by the time we got around to sort of feeling confident with running circle of security online, we only had 7 weeks before the summer holidays, and we were really keen to get it done before the summer holidays had started. So we ran it over 7 weeks, putting weeks 7 and 8 together. We trialled outcome measures and feedback going through SurveyMonkey and being sent in an email via kind of pre and post the group, and then matching people's feedback according to the day and month on which they were born as an identifier, to then pull it all together. Probably the biggest learning is don't do that. It was really time intensive to kind of match it all, and also it was really hard to kind of make sure that people follow it up. So we won't be doing that again. We also had circle of security fidelity coaching following each group to kind of debrief about the group online, to think about how we were finding it as facilitators, but also to have that opportunity to kind of formulate the difficulties for each mum in the group. The difference that we found this time around was that we actively encouraged mums to be in the room with babies. We talked about being in the room kind of on their own if they could be, but with their baby, which is different to our in-person group. Usually we have a creche, so we're not used to running it with babies in the room. Next slide, please. So we had 16 people referred to the group, of which 12 completed the programme. They were asked, everyone was asked to complete a postpartum bonding questionnaire and the core 10, like I said, using SurveyMonkey. 8 out of the 12 people completed the pre and post outcome measures, and as you can see, they have come down. So the PBQ has reduced in score, and the core moved from moderate distress to mild distress. Next slide, please. And then the SurveyMonkey feedback also used the circle of security evaluation questionnaires. So as you can see, most people found attending the group helpful to them and meeting with other groups of parents. They thought the facilitators did a good job of working with the group, and it's had a positive impact on their mental health, which is brilliant to hear. Next slide, please. So we also ran a focus group. We did the focus group together from the 2 groups, so we had participants from each group coming. The sort of feedback from people was they felt more able to share, they were less embarrassed to cry and kind of felt they had space to do that, or they were in a safe space at home to do that. Like Charlie said, sometimes they turned off their video if they were going to do that, but as part of the group we sort of actively encourage people to openly share their emotions and kind of be held by the group. they were saying that having the workbook to hand was helpful. So we posted the workbook from Circle of Security in line with their kind of restrictions. So everyone had the workbook and we could sort of guide them to each page for every week. We talked about her childcare and what that would have been like, and someone said that leaving their baby would have made them feel really anxious and they would have probably avoided the group. Having video on was helpful to relate to other people, and then with kind of people were managing their anxiety because it was virtual, so they didn't need to get organised, reducing stress, didn't have to worry about timings and naps and crying, and it was easier with childcare. And then again, like the other groups, some of the feedback was about that social connection and sort of saying it'd be useful to have space to connect outside the group. Kindly suggested WhatsApp and Facebook to share their kind of successes and struggles throughout the week, so that then they would feel less alone. Next slide, please. So we tried to do the session in an hour and a half, I think. So we've now increased it to 2 hours, and we've had a break in the middle just to sort of help pace the group so it mirrors what our in-person group would look like. We have been thinking about kind of how we meet the social needs of the group and promote connection outside. So as Charlie said, we're starting to send an email in all of our groups kind of around week 3, just saying if people would like their email addresses shared with other people to kind of opt in and sort of share their consent for that. We are exploring a follow-up group or drop-in sessions with local peer support service, because a lot of mums are saying sort of it's good to attend the group, but then how do they kind of continue that? And sometimes we find people towards the end of their time with our service. So we're hoping that we can collaborate with our local peer support service to set up an ongoing kind of Circle of Security drop-in. And then we have changed it slightly so that our outcome measures are completed by care coordinators as part of discussion of attending the group, so pre and then as part of that review afterwards, which so far seems to be working much, much better. So yeah, next slide. So I'll just hand over to Hayley.
Next slide, please. So during lockdown, we've done 3 different groups. We've done one at Teddy Bear's Picnic, we've done a virtual coffee morning, and we've done a walk and talk. Next slide, please. So the walk and talk was previously done pre-lockdown, and we did that as a drop-in walk. We found that that didn't work well with the people that was coming. We didn't know if they'd turn up, and if they were running late, we would leave and they weren't there. So our last one we did actually last week, and it went really well. We did it on a referral basis through the Care Co. We gathered like rapport before, and we rang them to see if they were coming, which we only had one that didn't come, and it went really well. So we learned that that would really help going forward during the booking system. And we did these groups to facilitate some kind of connection with mums. The virtual groups have been working well. There's lower rate than person groups, again, people are turning up more because of childcare. Sessions take a lot longer preparation time as in-person sessions. It's not quite the same, but serve an important function in the team that offer. When possible, mix of virtual and in-person groups will ensure equal offer service across the large geographical area. And we're thinking for future to do ad hoc sessions across the zones, and again that will be on referral basis through the Care Co. Definitely pre-group calls to develop rapport with one facilitator. The follow-up calls for the emotional coping skills weekly, but also we will do that for when they're needed for others. So if we do see somebody struggling, for instance. And hopefully this will increase confidence across the whole team in delivering the virtual programmes. We have recently added a new programme, and that is Gentle Steps, and that's nursery nurse led. This is a six-week course, and it's based on babies for 6 weeks to 18 weeks. There's a mixture of baby massage, baby yoga, learning development, safer sleep, play development, and baby mindfulness. And that's currently running at the moment. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, please.
That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you to you all. Yeah, and thanks for your reflections. It looks like we already have a question. So if you're happy just to jump straight into it, I'll ask it now. So the first question is from Charlotte, and she says, what permissions are needed for group members to share numbers and email addresses?
Oh, good question. So we asked our information governance, and we just have to get them to sort of opt in. We've got like an opt-in form that we're in the process of developing, and we'll send it out via email, and then they'll opt in that way, and then we just send it to those people who have opted in. I don't think that's particularly useful, but that's what we checked out.
Thank you for that. Anything from your team, Nick?
Yeah, nothing I think quite as stringent. So we also had an opt-in process, but we emailed the group members and said, if you let us know if you're happy for that to be shared, we will then share, everyone that says yes, we will share everyone else's email addresses with that group. Yeah, I guess we didn't think to check, but it probably would be helpful. In the face-to-face groups, people just choose and they chat to each other and share. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's difficult knowing like what's a GDPR issue. It's sometimes a bit blurry, I guess, if you normally do it face to face as well. We have a question from Kate. What has been the biggest technical issue for both teams?
For us, it's the poor connection, and particularly if someone's the main facilitator of the group, like we said, that co-facilitator really needs to know when to come in and what we're talking about. So it's really good collaboration for the facilitator and co-facilitator. That's really important that each know what we're doing. But that's the biggest one, is connection issues for us.
Yeah, I think connection is a real issue. I think feeling confident in being able to say, I don't know, switch it on and switch it back off again. But also, I think for us, I checked it out afterwards, which something we probably should have done before, but particularly with social security. So I didn't know what people were watching us on, whether they could see everybody or not everybody. And apparently using Microsoft Teams on a phone is almost as good as using it on a laptop. So I guess it was just kind of exploring it with people, what they're using, how they find it, what they can see when they're using it, and yeah, and just hoping their internet connection's good enough, and that yours is too, because mine has dropped out quite a few times at home, and I've been panicking.
I think it's owning it as well, and just being really honest with the ladies that are on the screen that, you know, this is a new way of working, and we're learning together, and just kind of owning it, and sometimes having a bit of a laugh about it with the other ladies, and you know, working through it, and just being honest about it, that it is difficult, but together we'll work through it, and we'll get it together as a bit of a team, including the ladies as well. So, yeah.
I would really agree with that. I think something we found quite helpful in West London is doing the assessments or screening appointments on video, because it sort of gives you a chance in a smaller environment for all of the things to go wrong, and then you can just, isn't it funny that we've got to that important bit and then no one could hear each other, and then you've kind of done it, so then there's a preparation for when you're in the group sessions. It doesn't feel, I think, anywhere jarring. But like your colleague from the Staffordshire team, I think you just got to fess up, haven't you, say, we missed that, or it's all frozen again, should we do it again? And that's nothing we can do.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there's been a lot of trial and error over the past few months, and everyone's in the same boat, so that's very good for everyone. We've had a question from Sarah, How have you adapted the way you teach to the virtual format to keep people interested and engaged?
I think one of the things that we've done is much like we would in a face-to-face group. We've tried to make sure that we've been doing a lot of screen sharing, sharing YouTube clips that we can reflect on together. Perhaps if we've got a lot of theory to go through, which we have at times in the ECS group, we've made sure that we've put a Word document or a PowerPoint document on or something where we can actually use that as a basis to talk from and people can refer to. So I think we've very much been trying to use the same sorts of techniques that we would use in a face-to-face group, really.
Did anyone else want to add anything, or is that sort of the general gist that's been for everyone?
I think, sorry Nick, I think we both unmuted at the same time. I think the thing for us, particularly maybe more with Circle of Security, is we found that actually our facilitation's different. Actually, you need to be a bit more active than maybe you would be in the room, but you aren't, that no one knows that you're looking at them. So you have to kind of openly say, I'm looking at you, I'm asking you, or I wonder what you think about it, and being a bit more direct, which initially felt really, really uncomfortable for me, but I think we're slowly getting there and feeling a bit more confident in saying that. And people respond really well to that because they also don't know who we're looking at either.
Did you want to add anything else, Nick?
I was going to say something similar about kind of needing to be, especially in the Circle of Security group, a little bit more direct and do a bit more of that. Oh, I can see lots of other people nodding, or I don't know, you're nodding as well. Is that something you're connecting with? Which I think in the room you might be more subtle with that, and you might wait and give a bit more space for somebody to speak. But I think trying to take the cues that are given and being kind of verbal about them so that it just invites people in a bit more. Because my sense is that people will find a way to say, no, I don't want to say anything, or they'll say something vague or something kind of brief, and then they're kind of back out again. So it doesn't feel anywhere near as pressuring as I thought it would feel to invite people in directly. Yeah.
That's really good to hear. We've had a question from Sukaina about engaging people that don't actually have access to the internet. I guess it's a given that people have access to the internet, but I guess that's not always the case. So how do you engage mums who don't have the internet?
With great difficulty would be kind of my summary. So I think the majority of women probably in our service do have the internet, but there's probably 15 or 20% that don't because of financial reasons, or they don't have an internet connection that's kind of good enough. This isn't our idea and it hasn't worked for anyone, but the online, we attended a training session from DBT British Isles about moving DBT groups online, and they had some suggestions about going somewhere in the near proximity of a library or a big business that has Wi-Fi, of trying to find ways to use someone else's Wi-Fi. So I'm not endorsing that, and we haven't kind of asked people to do that. But I guess there's something about trying to be creative, or does a neighbour have Wi-Fi that you would be able to use for an hour and a half? And kind of failing that, I think we've tried to kind of then offer something by phone. We found that all of the women in the service have a phone, so that if we can't get them into a group, we will offer something individually by phone.
Yeah.
Women in the security group who would connect to her nearest hotspot from her house. I mean, it was ropey and it didn't connect well, but she used to just listen to the audio and she could see the videos. But people have been unbelievably keen to attend, and I think they've really found a way that will work for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think we found very similarly that people will find a way to attend. We have had a few instances, like Nick said, where we've done it on telephone, and I think the kind of supporting materials really help with that. Particularly the anxiety workbooks, I think, have been really useful. They are pretty much kind of what's delivered in the group, with the exception of the discussions. So all the content's there, so you can just sort of go through it it's not ideal, but I guess it's a kind of good enough way for while we're working like this for now.
Yeah. We have about 4 or 5 more questions. I don't know if do people have time to stay on for another 5 or so minutes? Yeah, I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so we have a question from Michelle about the nursery nurse-led group called Gentle Steps. And could you speak a bit more about it? Was it a 16-week group?
Yeah, so yeah, it might just be the way we communicated. So it's a 6-week group for babies that are between 8 and 16 weeks old, if that makes sense. It's difficult because our nursery nurse, who's fabulous, is not on the call, but I have been co-facilitating it. So it's a very, very new group. Lots of the things that she would normally do, such as baby massage. We've had lots of discussions with the powers that be on baby massage, and yes, we can do it virtually, but this is how we have to do it. So yeah, it's a 6-week session, and the 16 weeks relates to age of baby. We're looking at doing another one because what we find, and I'm sure colleagues do as well, that weaning is a bit of a difficult period. So we're looking at maybe doing a 16+ week one within, you know, capturing some babies in the weaning period, because our nursery nurse spends a lot of time doing weaning basic, and so do I as an OT. So yeah, we're just capturing a very early babies at the moment, young babies, but we will be hopefully expanding that out.
Lovely, thanks for that. We have a question from Leanne, and this is something that I'd been thinking as well and jotted down to ask. Do you think you will continue to run virtual groups and like online therapies once you like return to normal, or we back to normal?
I think that probably the short answer is yes. I think we will certainly keep some of what we've been doing. I think it sounds a bit vague, but I suspect we'll end up doing a bit of a mix. But I think what's really the biggest learning kind of point for me is around attendance, and I think particularly our DBT informed skills group, which is particularly aimed at women who struggle with that kind of self-directed behaviour, kind of enacting plans, doing things on time, tolerating difficulties, and kind of coming back. I think there's something easier about that online platform that starts as a kind of really helpful starting point. I was talking to a colleague earlier, so it's usual kind of at the start of a DBT skills group or emotional coping skills group, if the woman hasn't attended and she hasn't been in contact, that you would ring her with a focus on encouraging, doing kind of whatever it takes to get somebody to the group. And that's a really important part of the kind of the way the therapy works. And actually in face-to-face, that's quite tricky because you might convince someone in, but it's going to still take them at least half an hour to get to you and they miss some of the group. But actually the work that's required to then get somebody into a group might mean they miss 5 or 10 minutes rather than 30 or 40 or even kind of 45. So I think there's something really helpful, particularly about the emotional coping skills group online, that I would imagine we will retain some of.
Yeah, similarly in our service, I think we will have a mix moving forward. A lot of the feedback has sort of said it gave me the confidence to go to an in-person group in the future. So I think it's a good kind of stepping stone to attending something else. Also, we cover a huge county, 2 counties. So actually for us kind of resource-wise, it works really well to have some of the groups virtually. Because sometimes some of our women are kind of driving an hour to get to a clinic, and that's a long time. So yeah, I think we'll definitely continue in some form.
I think as well, just to add to that, one of the things that we've been reflecting on is how our job plans have changed through lockdown, and we're not quite sure how we're going to get to the point where we can change them back to incorporating travel. So for us, thinking about the effectiveness of our work, it's actually been so helpful to be able to run remote groups, you know, and have that extra time to plough into other areas of clinical work.
Yeah, I think there's definitely benefits to working virtually. We found that as a college as well. It's going to be tricky to leave some of the virtual stuff behind when we do go back to normal. I think we've got time for one more question, but I'm going to sort of like combine it into 2 because we've had 2 questions about the DBT skills group. So the first was about how did you decide what content to put into the group, and the second was how did you keep it interactive to keep the group engaged.
Okay, I'll start with that, but I don't know whether Nick's team might have anything to add to this. 6 weeks felt like a really tall order. I mean, there's such a lot of information incorporated into DBT, isn't there? In the end, we decided on 6 sessions, and we decided to go for 2 emotion regulation sessions, 2 distress tolerance sessions, and we actually started the group with 2 mindfulness sessions. So for us, we actually left out the interpersonal effectiveness, which didn't sit all that comfortably because it's such a huge part of you know, the kind of emotional coping skills. But we just felt that the mindfulness, starting with that and then flowing into emotion regulation and distress tolerance, it meant that there was such a lovely overlap between the skills that you learn early on and how you might be able to incorporate them when you're actually putting some of those other skills into practice. But it was really, really hard. I think we had to just think about our own experiences of perhaps running groups before, or our own individual sessions, and how it's gone down trying to teach particular skills. So my experience, and this is just my experience, was that trying to teach somebody opposite action is actually really, really tricky. So oh, I'm really happy that Nick's nodding there. So actually what I decided was we're going to leave that out, and we're actually going to focus on something that we think people are really going to be able to grab hold of and take home with them and really practice. So we tried to go for skills that seemed more accessible, and that people could go away and practice and come back and feedback about how they've been getting on. So essentially we took a punt and went with the things that we thought were going to be most effective, and the overall feedback of the group is good. I suppose they don't know what they've missed, but I think that there's been some benefits. So that's essentially what we've done, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Nick's team now about what they decided to go for.
Rachel, are you going to say something?
So our group is a bit longer. Ours is a 12-week group, and we've broken it down into 3 modules. The first module is mindfulness and distress tolerance, and then we do another session of mindfulness at the beginning of module 2 and module 3. The rest of module 2 is emotion regulation, and the rest of module 3 is interpersonal effectiveness. I guess similarly, we've picked skills that we think are going to be most useful for the women, but it's also, we're just about to finish our second group, so it's early days, so I think we will spend a bit of time thinking about which skills have been most helpful, and then we will adapt it as needed going forward. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I think I'll end the Q&A there just because I'm aware it is past 3 o'clock, although I think the questionnaire probably could have gone on for a long time, as we had a lot of questions. I was wondering though if the couple of questions that were unanswered, if you provided an answer for them, could we maybe pop that on our knowledge hub, and then we could refer people there for any answers, because there was a couple that we didn't get time to answer. I'll send an email with those in. Yeah, so with that in mind, as I said before, this webinar has been recorded, and we'll pop it up on our web pages. We'll also send it in our perinatal chat on .mailer as well. And as I said before, any of those unanswered questions, we can put answers to them on our knowledge hub. So if you haven't joined up, please do. If you just search Perinatal Quality Network on Knowledge Hub, you can join us there. And if you're unsure of how to use it, please do just email the PQN team and we can help you out. We also have our annual forum coming up on the 2nd of November. So if you haven't signed up, please do. It's free for PQN members and £55 for non-members. And more details can be found on our website and Knowledge Hub. And I think that's all the announcements I had to make. Thanks again to the 2 brilliant teams that joined us today, and thank you all for attending. I hope you found it useful, and I had a really nice hour chatting with everyone, so thank you very much.